Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And today I'm going to be fermenting some hard-boiled eggs. I have a few videos on this, but I figure it was time to just do a new one. And I just want to say, I've been fermenting eggs for years and I love them. So that's hard-boiled eggs, by the way. But, you know, some people say, oh, you shouldn't do that, but I've never had any issues with it. I find I love how the fermenting gives the hard-boiled eggs more flavor, makes them almost a little bit fizzy, gives them a bit of a bite. Now, this is different than using vinegar and making pickled eggs. This isn't going for a more sour flavor. It just gives it a bit of a bite. And then you can add whatever seasonings you want to add flavor to this. If you're concerned about it, I suggest just doing your own research. I'm just sharing with you what I do. And again, I love this. It's my favorite way to eat hard-boiled eggs. And I usually mix it up and make it a little bit different each time. So today I'm only going to make a quart jar, but I think there's at least 10 eggs in here anyway. Sometimes I'll make a half gallon at a time, which I don't remember, maybe about 18 eggs I put in there. And then one of the things that you need for this is some kind of fermentation starter. That can be whey that you've strained off of yogurt, or some other, like if you're making homemade cheese, like your farmer's cheese, anything you've strained off that, or even cottage cheese. As long as it's some kind of whey, it's going to help it ferment. I always use my homemade fermentation starter, which I have a very thorough video out that I did a few years ago. I'll link to down below, but I'll just explain it very briefly here since this video is not going to take very long anyway. This particular fermentation starter I made with ginger. In fact, it's commonly called a ginger bug. But since I don't always make it out of ginger, but make it out of all kinds of things, like this one here is raisin. I use other types of berries. I've even used dandelion flowers and red clover and other types of herbs. I've used dried and fresh. The only thing I found is that if it's been previously frozen, it may or may not work. There's something about the freezing process. You can use freeze-dried, you can use dehydrated, you can use fresh, but freezing, sometimes it'll still ferment okay. Not always. So the fermentation starter for me, even for things that don't necessarily need a starter, I still like to add it because it just ensures that those things are going to ferment instead of spoil, in case there's no live bacteria or yeast present on whatever you're doing it, because maybe you washed it too much or it got too hot or whatever the case may be. I used to do when I'd make it, just do add a little bit at a time. Now I usually start it about halfway. I'll put in maybe a couple tablespoons of whatever it is I'm using, whether it be raisins or ginger, and then fill it about halfway full of water. You want to make sure it's not chlorinated water, and preferably no fluoride either. So I use filtered rainwater when I do that. You can use distilled water, whatever you have. And then, or you can just dechlorinate your tap water, which is as simple as just letting it sit in an open container with a cloth over it for a couple of days. Anyway, then I add about a tablespoon of sugar the first day. Then I top it off with water, add some more goods, and then add another teaspoon of sugar. And then I'll do that for 3 to 4 days until you see it very, very bubbly and active. Once it's bubbly, it's ready to use. So you'll know because it'll be very fizzy. This might not look fizzy, but hear that? You can hear it trying to bubble out under the lid. Then when I'm not using it, I keep it in the fridge. And then when I need it, I pull it out of the fridge. I use it straight from the jar, straining out this stuff and then putting it back in. And then I'll add another teaspoon of sugar and top it off with water, and then let it sit for the rest of the day until it gets real fizzy again, and then stick it in the refrigerator until I need it again. Now, it can last for a long time in the refrigerator without having to keep feeding it. So I've had them actually still be good after a couple months. They kind of start to get to a point where they're going to start to turn to wine, and there will be a point that you can't bring it back to an active state. But if you stay on it and at least take it out every once in a while, stir it up, add some sugar, and then leave it. And by the way, that's organic cane sugar is best. Honey is also good. Do not use high mineral sugars like coconut sugar, molasses, or anything like that, because they have so many minerals it can actually kill or really slow down your fermentation starter. So anyway, that is what I'm using. So whenever I'm fermenting anything, the typical measurement is going to be a 1/4 cup for every quart jar, a half cup for a half gallon, or if you're making like a gallon of wine or mead, you're going to use a whole cup. So a quarter cup per quart of whatever it is you're making. So since I'm only doing a quart jar, I'm going to use a quarter cup of this. You can use more and it's fine. You can put a whole cup in here if you want. The minimum though is going to be a quarter cup for each quart of whatever it is you're making, be it kimchi, eggs, a natural soda, wine, mead, so on. So let's go ahead and add that fermentation starter. And this is stainless steel, so I don't have to worry about it harming my ferment. I'm going to use the ginger for this one, and I'm just going to pour it in there. So even after I gave you all those ratios, I just typically just pour it in there. I don't care how much I end up with, as long as I got at least a quarter cup, which that's probably closer to a half cup, and that's fine. And then I'll feed that and top it off later. So that's added to my eggs. That's already in there. And by the way, I use the steam method and then to cook my eggs. And then, you know, with a basket, I have a video on this. And then you still want to follow up with really, really cold water. The cold or ice water is really the key to help your eggs, even if you boil them, to help your eggs peel better. But I just find I've had best results with the steaming and then the cold water. And so then to that, what I'm going to add is I've got some, this is actually garlic that I've already fermented. You can see the jar back here. I fermented it, got it sliced up. I'm going to throw that in there. I picked a couple of fresh sprigs of rosemary from my garden. I'll throw those in there just for added flavor. And then I'm going to add about a teaspoon of salt to that. So I'm using the Himalayan pink salt here. And I had these peppers from my garden. These are the Chinese 5-color that I'd frozen up back in 2020. And I keep forgetting they're in there because now I like to dehydrate and powder them and then use the powder. But I do like using the slices for this. So unfortunately, the purple ones didn't really hold their color, but it'll still be cool. So I'm going to put more. These are pretty spicy peppers, but I really want that heat to permeate into my eggs. That's all I'm going to put. Now you can also add, you know, granulated garlic. You can add any kind of dried herbs. It doesn't have to be fresh. When it comes to rosemary, whenever it's coming in, or thyme, whenever I have those coming in fresh, I like using them. But thyme would be another great option. Oregano, sage, whatever you think sounds good. And some other options would be if you're one to make beet kvass. The beet kvass makes a great fermentation for eggs. Just pour the beet kvass straight in there. So it's already fermented, and you know, as long as it's still fizzy and bubbly, it's going to ferment that eggs and then give them this really beautiful color as well. And then I've also done one where I had some tapatio and put a whole bunch of tapatio in the jar, and that was all I added to it. Those were pretty good. I still like usually rosemary and garlic, and then some kind of hotness to it is my personal favorite. But the beet kvass eggs are pretty dang good as well. I'm putting a silicone ring in this only because I'm going to shake it, and I want to make sure it doesn't leak. So I'm just going to shake that stuff around. And I will probably do this every so often. Just come in here and shake this. Now, one thing you might want to do, so I already had the eggs in here. I didn't want to take them out. You can put your eggs in a few at a time, then put in your spices, and so it's better mixed in there. But if you simply kind of shake stuff around every so often, that stuff is going to move around in there and start to blend. So you can see my garlic's down in here already, so that's good. Hopefully I can get those peppers down there. But that will also mix that fermentation starter well around in there. And then, since I've got that silicone ring on there, when I'm not so worried about it today, but by tomorrow this should start fizzing. And so after I shake it, I'm going to want to make sure that I release the air bubbles and then just put that lid on just finger tight. You don't want it super tight when you're fermenting or it could blow it off. Now you can use metal lids. You can use pickling tops. I never use those. I just have not found a need for any of that stuff. But I do like the plastic when I'm fermenting better than metal, just because the metal lids, because I'm always reusing lids, eventually they can rust and the bands and all that. So I do prefer plastic in this case. And then I do like to use one of my coasters, and I'll set that back there next to my vinegars and then let it ferment. So again, usually about 3 days, it'll be nice and fizzy and yummy. You can let it sit longer if you would prefer. I've actually had some, when I do a smaller jar like this, I'll just leave it on the counter and start usually about, you know, the 3rd or 4th day, I'll start working through it and just leave it on the counter until it's gone. And, but you can also keep it in the refrigerator, especially if you're in a real hot climate. You may want to keep it in the refrigerator once it's fully fizzy. I do recommend that. Here it's, you know, we tend to stay pretty much on the cooler side. We don't get a whole lot of really hot days. So unless it's really hot, I just keep it on the counter until I work through it. So anyway, it's as simple as that. I do recommend, by the way, you go watch the more thorough video on the fermentation starter because I cover a whole bunch of other points about it and other things that you can use to make it. But it's super easy and you can use it to ferment anything. You can even make bread with it, a yeast bread. And I have a video on that as well, which I'll link to down below. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and that maybe this will encourage you to just give it a try, see what you think. And you can even start with a pint jar and just do 3 or 4 eggs. You don't have to do a whole bunch at once. You know, it's always good to just sample something first, see if you're even gonna like it before you make a whole giant batch of it. And remember, you can be creative and add any kind of spice or herb to it that you want, that you think sounds good. And I have a lot more fermenting videos. I'll just link to my full fermenting playlist in the description box down below. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.